Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for our second of 4 Triple M meetings. Hope you had a restful, safe, and happy holiday season. And going right back into 2021 and right back to business. My name is Shafiq Jamal. I'm one of the communications managers here at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And I just want to start by saying thank you to all of you for joining us here today. We always welcome member input, member feedback, member participation. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. I think the next thing that I want to sort of talk about is you should see on your screen a screen with 4 tabs. This is our new member enhanced experience for today's Triple M. Further to feedback that we had received from members following our first event. We have tried to really make it easy for you. So now you should see a screen with 4 different tabs. One should say votes, one should say questions, one should say support, and one should say FAQs. So we've tried to make this easy for you so that it's all in one screen. And we will be using 3 different tabs at any given point in time. The FAQs are there, of course, should you have any questions. If you require support, please click support and ask your question there. And support will help you with any technical issues. The questions tab is what you're going to use when you ask questions in our bylaws, and I'll go through the agenda in a minute, and our proposed bylaw amendments, and you'll be able to use that when we do our Ask Me Anything towards the end of today. Now, for those of you who will register or have registered after 9:35, it's just an important reminder that you will no longer be able to participate in voting, but you will be able to sort of participate in the entire Triple M. So just a call out on that. And thank you to those who did sign up before. We look forward to your participation. So today's agenda, after I finish my introductions, I'm going to hand it to our President, Chris Shields, who's going to give us an update from his perspective. Following that, I'm going to have a fireside equivalent chat with our lawyer, Michael Blatchford from Norton Rose Fulbright. And we're going to go through each proposed bylaw amendment, and then we're going to have some discussion and dialogue, and we're going to give you a chance to ask us questions on each and every one of those proposed bylaw amendments before we get to the AGM. Now, it's important to point out that today's voting is for straw poll purposes only. It is non-binding, but it allows us to get a gauge of how members feel about proposed bylaw amendments before we get to AGM. At the AGM, the vote will be binding, and a reminder that voting at the AGM is only open to those members who can vote. Now, that leads to another thing. Many members have been asking us why we don't use Zoom. Simply trust us. We have looked into this. We've done the due diligence. We won't tell you how the sausage is made, because you don't need to know that. But what you do need to know is that there's 2 reasons why we cannot use Zoom. First and foremost is the fact that it caps us out at 1,000, even after enhancements. And while at Triple M's we may not reach into the thousands, though we'd like to, at the AGM, for those of you who were there last year, you'll remember, or you may remember, we had 930 attendees in total, in person and online. This year, as you know, we're in COVID, and we're practicing the COVID safety protocols even in this room. And as a result of that, our March 11 AGM is going to be virtual. Now, we have 3,800 members, close to 3,800 members. We do not want to limit their ability in any way to participate. So that's the first reason why we cannot use Zoom for today's meetings, as well as at the AGM, today's meeting and future Triple M's as well. The second reason is, I just mentioned this, that we have different types of membership at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And so we want to ensure that those who can vote actually do vote at the AGM. So this is all a dress rehearsal towards the AGM on March 11th. And so this is the reason why we're going through all of this right now. And it's getting you conditioned to using our portal and our system. So with that, I will now hand it over to our President, Chris Shields. Thank you. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Shaf. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Shields, President of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. I hope you all had a great Christmas and holiday season and a happy start to 2021. For many reasons, I'm sure we're all super glad to see 2020 in the rearview mirror, right? That said, while 2020 has been a grueling, challenging, and unusual year, our industry has not only persevered, but many would also say it thrived. The market has been on fire since midsummer when we emerged from the lockdown. We have never seen this level of sustained, record-breaking housing demand for the entire latter half of the year, particularly during the lead up to the holidays. December sales came in at 2,086, which was 67% higher compared to December 2019. No other December in our history even comes close. New listings were also the second highest they've ever been in December. And as we closed out December for the year 2020, total sales in the Fraser Valley came in at 19,926. That's up over 28% compared to 2019. To put this in perspective, halfway through 2020, our sales were tracking to finish below 2019 levels. Considering what our profession and consumers were up against, all of you are to be commended for the sheer volume of work accomplished, all the while keeping your clients safe. Collectively, we did an excellent job to ensure that transactions could continue without undue risk to the public. And what stands out are the clear trends behind those numbers. Fraser Valley is highly sought after because we offer increased choice and diversified housing opportunities for far greater value. Clearly, the pandemic changed everything in 2020, including the market. As more people were forced to work from home due to the pandemic, we saw unprecedented demand for detached homes and townhomes in our region. With people commuting less, they want more space, and as we all know, you get way more bang for your housing buck in the Fraser Valley. And now, as more companies indicate that employees will not need to work from the office ever again, housing is becoming more of a sanctuary. Moving forward, for many of us, home will serve many functions: home, office, school, entertainment center, and playground. I'm sure what I'm about to say isn't going to surprise any of you. We are facing supply shortages and challenges. Without sufficient supply in the coming years, demand pressures from strong demographic fundamentals could create the same type of affordability challenges experienced by the rest of Metro Vancouver over the past decade. The economic fundamentals show that the supply will be very much needed. So, how should we respond? We need to do what we can to work collaboratively with the provincial and municipal governments, the real estate development and construction industries, and the various chambers of commerce and trade in the Fraser Valley to urge, nudge, and push for less red tape and more expediency in bringing well-built properties to market. This is something we at the board are of course working on, and we will continue to advocate on behalf of our industry. In terms of 2021, with the arrival of several vaccines for COVID-19, I know we are all cautiously hopeful and optimistic that we can soon enter a new normal. However, I urge you not to let your guards down. We hear Dr. Henry's numbers every day, and we are nowhere near out of the woods. Vaccinations will take months. We have a responsibility as professionals to continue to ensure that we are protecting not only our clients, but each other and our communities. Our industry is very well equipped to serve our clients using technology. In fact, we've always been a leading industry in this regard, and it's never been more important than now. Let's continue to be industry and community leaders by leveraging the power of technology. Finally, you may or may not know, but in 2021, our board turns 100 years young. Yes, a century in operation. Remarkable, right? The board has approved funds and set aside in our budget for a celebration in the fall of 2021, a time at which we hope that the COVID-19 safety protocols may be eased given the vaccine rollout. The centennial is an immense time of pride and recognition for our members. It gives us a chance to inform, educate, and engage our public more about the value of working with a realtor. And not just in helping them with the buying and selling process, but over and above that, the impact we have in the communities in which we all live, work, and play. The FVREB team is exploring some exciting options to ensure that we leverage the centennial and make it a positively memorable occasion for all our members, the public, and our dedicated, hardworking staff as well. More to come on this. In closing, I wish to extend a sincere thanks to all of you for what you are continuing to do to persevere during these challenging times. Shaf, back to you.
Michael, nice to have you here today.
Thanks. Great to be here, Shaf.
Good. Reminder members, you should be looking at our screen right now, which has the questions tab, so feel free to start asking questions so we can get some questions lined up. Again, this is a reminder, it's Michael Blatchford, a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright and our legal counsel, and I'm glad to have you here today. And how are you doing?
Good, thank you. It's been a busy start to the year for lawyers as well as realtors by the sounds of it.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, it has been. So just to describe the process again, or remind everybody what we're going to be doing today in the next little while, is I'm going to read the proposed bylaw amendment. Michael's going to provide some context on the proposed bylaw amendment, and then we'd love to have questions. So please start to submit your questions so that we can answer those questions and give you context on each of these proposed bylaw amendments. Michael, there's 6 that we're going to go through today.
Right.
Right. And let's get going.
Sure.
All right. So the first proposed bylaw amendment is as follows. A new bylaw that gives the board the power to allow members to vote outside the time for an AGM. For example, allow members to cast votes on planned resolutions up to 2 weeks in advance by submitting ballots on paper or online. Michael, do you want to contextualize for our attendees what this proposed bylaw amendment is all about?
Sure, thanks, Shaf. So, as opposed to the rest of the concepts which we'll be discussing today, this would be an entirely new bylaw added to the current bylaws of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. Right now, the bylaws provide for voting in a number of ways, but all of those are limited to the time in which an AGM is happening, whether that's in person, by proxy, or by remote technology. All of those votes have to be cast during the time of an AGM, which is, a few hours over the course of one morning. And each vote only over the course of a few minutes during that interval. What we're proposing here for your consideration and feedback, and for the ultimate decision of the Governance Committee, the Board of Directors, and the membership to approve an actual bylaw, is to add something new, which would allow the Board of Directors to open up voting beyond the time frame of the actual AGM. Primarily, this would be used to allow voting in advance. We're calling this the advance voting bylaw, so that with the business that was known for the meeting, elections, perhaps special resolutions, the receiving of the financial statements and the approval of last year's minutes, all of those things could be voted on by members who can't attend the meeting, virtually or otherwise, in advance. And they could do that via an online advance voting platform, and those votes would be then counted and added to the votes that are cast during the meeting, giving you the result.
Thank you. That's great context. And Michael, let's start with the first question. How will this benefit members? Like, why did we want to even propose this bylaw amendment?
Well, it allows more choice. You have a board of about almost 3,800 members, and even in last year's outstandingly well-attended AGM, we were at about 930, it was said.
Yeah.
Less than 1/3 of all the members are coming out to the AGM. This provides another means by which members can engage. I have to stress, it does not replace the ability to physically or virtually attend that AGM. It provides another option for those who are either unable or, for whatever reason, can't spare the time to come to that AGM or turn on their computer at that moment. Maybe they're busy with a deal. Maybe they're busy with a personal matter. But this would give the option of them voting in advance. So there's more flexibility.
And I can see from what you've just said that we want to ensure every member has his or her opportunity to provide their vote, correct?
That's right. It would allow a greater engagement. And, members are going to fall into different categories. We've heard it said that, attending the AGM and being present to hear the discussion is really important. And for some, I can't argue that's absolutely true. Others, though, don't feel that way. They know where they stand on certain issues. They know who they want to elect without having heard the speeches that are given there. They might know how they want to vote on a special resolution to amend the bylaws without hearing the debate. This would provide them that option. For those that are not sure and need to hear more and want to hear the perspectives of their fellow members and the information provided by the Board of Directors, I stress again, this does not take away their ability to come to the AGM, to hear what people are saying, and to make up their mind in that moment. But for those who already have their mind made up and can't be there, this would allow them to vote in a more flexible way in advance.
And Michael, does this make us unique in terms of other boards? And are we sort of different in that we don't have this yet? Maybe explain a little bit about that.
That's a great question. This type of flexibility in voting is something that is relatively new under the New Societies Act, which has only been around for about 4 years now. During that time, more and more organizations, even before we were entered into a global pandemic, realized the need for more flexibility in how and when members were able to vote and how they engaged with their members. So we've seen a trend of organizations moving towards having the ability to do advance voting. Again, I'm hitting that word ability because it's not automatic. It's for the Board of Directors to decide this is an appropriate circumstance in which we should engage with our members and allow them to vote in advance.
I see.
So it's another tool in the tool belt of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board to engage with their members and to have members who could not be at the AGM still have their voice heard.
Okay, members, if I just checked in with my colleague Anthony, and there's no questions yet, please feel free to ask questions. So I'll make this the last question then. Michael, 2 weeks, was there a deliberate rationale for why this proposed bylaw amendment has that, or was that just convenience?
Oh, so let me be clear. The example that's given is not necessarily the bylaw in its entirety. The bylaw proposal would allow the advance voting to happen. How it happens and what kind of time frame in advance, that's why there's discretion and authority given to the Board of Directors to decide that. And they could do that either, on a case-by-case basis, or more likely, once they've tried this and know how it's working, they'll establish a policy that says, here's our approach to advance voting at AGMs and so on.
Thank you. I'm glad you're able to provide that context. All right, so reminder now, members, I'm going to reread the proposed bylaw amendment. I am then going to read the voting question, and then I'm going to give you, you're going to be on a screen thereafter where I'll guide you through how to make sure you can actually vote. So let's get started. The bylaw amendment, again, number A that is being proposed is a new bylaw that gives the board the power to allow members to vote outside the time for an AGM. For example, allow members to cast votes on planned resolutions up to 2 weeks in advance by submitting ballots on paper or online. The voting question, and reminder again, the voting here today is to allow us to gauge member interest and to get a sense, to help you condition you to voting ahead of the AGM. It's non-binding. So the voting question is as follows. Based on what you've heard here today, do you support a new bylaw that allows for advance voting by members? And at this time, please make sure that on your screen, you're on the vote screen. And when you're there, click the home button to refresh, not the browser, the home button on that screen to refresh. And then once you make your vote, make sure you hit continue and then confirm your vote, otherwise your vote will not be counted. So let's get the clock started on this proposed bylaw amendment. And while that's happening, Michael, I just wanted to kind of share with you, it's been quite the year at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And I don't know, if you or our members know some of these key stats and highlights. So if you don't mind, I'll share them with you. So,
absolutely.
The first thing I just want to pick at, I'm just the riches of statistics here and data, but a survey conducted by the BC Real Estate Association in May 2020, FVREB was given the highest rating in quality of service. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just been an incredibly Interesting time, as you know, with the pandemic, we had to pivot, and we had to continue to find ways to serve the membership, even though we were in lockdown. And I think the board, staff, the board of directors, everyone is to be commended on how they stepped up and how they ensured that there was no disruption to members. At the start of the pandemic, we actually had to, I see the clock's down, so stand by for results, but we had to continue providing service to our members because did you know that real estate was declared a non-health essential service, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's
great. To have a result like that at the height of the uncertainty of that pandemic is a real achievement.
I think so, and kudos goes to all our members who have continued to find ways to meet the needs of the home buying and selling public. And thank you for allowing us at the board to be able to help you with that critical mission during the 10 months, or actually, even though we were in pandemic lockdown for a while, we were trying to find ways to continue to serve members. Oh, and I see the results are up. So 84.2 in favor, 15.8% not in favor. Michael, what do you think?
I think that's a pretty strong result. As we said, this is a straw poll, not a binding one, but that indicates of these members being polled, very strong majority in favor of putting this tool in the toolbox to allow for advanced voting.
Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you indeed. So let's move to the second proposed bylaw amendment, B, if you will. And here it is for your edification. If advance voting were permitted, do you think proxy voting is still needed since any member can vote directly in advance? Michael?
Right, so some context on this. Proxy voting has been a part of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board voting rights for many, many years, decades in fact. And it is one way, proxy voting is one way of having your voice heard and your vote count when you're not able to deliver it yourself. Now, it's kind of the most traditional way of doing that, and it's existed for, centuries. But as technology has advanced, there have become other ways, and Fraser Valley Real Estate Board has moved in some of those directions. We had our first partially virtual meeting last year, just before the pandemic really became shut everything down. And just a moment ago, we talked about another way of voting in advance. Prior to these technological advancements, proxy was really the only way to get your vote counted if you couldn't be there to give it yourself. You couldn't make it to the meeting, and so you would hand your vote via a signed form to another member who would then go and vote for you. That's the context in which we have this. Now, the question that we're putting to you is, now that there are other ways via technology that a member can directly vote themselves, even if they can't be at the meeting physically, moreover, per the last discussion, even if they couldn't be online at the time of the meeting voting in advance, is it still necessary to be able to give your vote to another member to go and vote for you? That's the question.
And Michael, I think that's a really important point. And we realize, of course, our members have busy lives and, they're almost working 24/7. But the first question I would have is, with proxy voting, like you say, technology has advanced so much. Mm-hmm. But with proxy voting, isn't there sort of the inherent risk that you do not know how he or her, who you've handed the proxy vote to, how he or her would kind of vote in the moment?
Yeah, that is one of the drawbacks of proxy voting. I hear from those who are used to proxy voting say, well, this is just another way. Why wouldn't we keep all the tools available to vote in as many ways as possible? And I hear the sentiment behind that. My response is that you have to think about whether those ways of voting are really going to reflect the intent of the person whose vote it is. Now, with proxy voting, you really don't know. It's an unaccountable system. You give a slip of paper to somebody else that you've signed, they now have two votes, their own and yours. You may or may not have told them how to exercise your vote, but you have no way of knowing or guaranteeing that they actually voted that way. There's no accountability with proxy voting, and so in poor situations, it's open to abuse. That somebody could gather up votes, or a group of people could gather up votes just so they can double up on what their own views are, rather than reflecting the wishes of those who gave them. Whereas in contrast, one of these other direct voting mechanisms, remote voting or advance voting, truly reflects what that member said because it comes directly from them, whether before the meeting or remotely during the meeting.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we have 3 questions from members. Thank you for posing those questions. Anthony, read out our first one.
Yes, and this one's from Manj Hans from Remax Blueprint. Now, this refers actually to the first concept that you guys talked about, but you may have a chance to discuss it here. He asks, is there an option to lower that 2-week time frame to 1 week in regards to the voting, of advance voting?
Oh, yes. So with regards to the advance voting period, yes, there is. And again, I want to emphasize that the example given in that concept is not the totality of the concept. The advance voting could happen over whatever period, 1 week, 2 weeks, that the board of directors decides is appropriate. So the bylaw would simply allow for advance voting as determined by the board of directors. It wouldn't restrict it to exactly 2 weeks in advance of the AGM. That's a discretionary decision that could happen. So short answer, yes, it could be if that's what the board thinks is appropriate.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Anthony, the second question?
And again, it's with respect to the advance voting. Tor Jacobson from the McDonald Realty, he wants to know, with advance voting, if the board's going to be diligent about putting out plenty of information in advance so they can make informed decisions.
Well, I think I can handle that one.
Sure. You take it.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think, we would be working with Michael and the governance committee and the bylaw rewrite committee. And if I can toot our communications team's horn, with thanks to them, we have been commended by members recently in terms of how much communications we have, how we've ramped it up in the last year, and how much we're putting out. So thank you for your feedback and for your receptivity. But to answer Tori's question more directly, yes, we will definitely be doing a lot of educating and advising. Right, Michael?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add also that in regards to some future advance vote, I would say that my recommendation to be in the bylaw is that there would be a requirement for materials to be provided in advance. So it couldn't just be a question with no context and no background information. That the requirement of advance voting would have to be that there is some materials provided to members so that they know what they're voting on and what the relevant background is.
Excellent. So I think we've exhausted the questions there. There is one last question that I'd like to ask, and I think it's in relation to even to the first one. But how does the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board compare in terms of this, and compared to in terms of this proposed bylaw amendment compared to other real estate boards? Are we ahead, behind? Maybe share some context.
Well, proxy voting is falling out of favor because from time to time organizations see one of those abusive situations happen. And it's particularly troubling where one person is able to gather many votes to themselves. Fraser Valley is not in that situation. But the trend is that proxy voting is slowly disappearing. Other real estate boards are moving away from this as well. Some already have changed their bylaws to say proxy voting not allowed. One thing further I'd say is that in the new atmosphere we find ourselves in, where probably technology is going to be a greater part of all our lives, proxy voting is really problematic on many of the tech platforms that we would use to hold a meeting like this. Most, Zoom or other platforms that are kind of the standard that we use for communication, they can't distinguish between one person who's meant to hold 2 votes and one person that only is meant to hold 1. So proxy voting is a problem from a tech perspective as well, and that's why one other reason why it's not working for boards anymore in many cases.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, I think, I know in the past we've had these kinds of questions, but our auditors are going to provide a lot of rigor, right? Ernst & Young are going to make sure that our voting, whether it's advance, in terms of at least the first one, that, they're providing that scrutiny and rigor on this process.
That's right. Scrutineering of voting is always going to be a top priority. And that won't change if you move to advance voting. It didn't change last year when you did the voting where a significant number of people were participating remotely. There'll always need to be good procedures in place to make sure that the votes are counted appropriately.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder, if you have any other questions, feel free. We're keeping this interactive and this dialogue going. So feel free to ask any more questions as we even move ahead. So I'm going to reread the proposed bylaw amendment, give you the voting question, advise you on how to refresh, and be ready to vote, okay? So here it is. If advance voting were permitted, do you think proxy voting is still needed since any member can vote directly in advance? And the voting question that we have for you today, based on what you heard here today, do you think that if advance voting is available, does the FVREB still need to allow proxies? So again, reminder, go to the screen that says, click on the tab that says vote, hit home over there to refresh, not home in your browser. And then after you vote, please press continue and ensure you confirm your vote so it is counted. And why don't we start the clock on that one? And while that's happening, Michael, let's provide our members with some other key wow stats.
Hit me with another one.
All right. So in a year of pandemic, I thought I found this quite interesting, is that the number of new members added, 333.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible?
That's pretty big growth.
Right? And number of newly added 25-plus year members, 68.
Wow.
You know, I think it's a testament to the fact that we have members who serve their clients for a long time in this industry.
That's right.
And obviously, I think we're attracting new members to become part of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, and I think this bodes well for us. You know, I think ultimately it's great reputationally. I think that it's indicative of the fact that we're in a pretty hot housing market.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by the fact that 68 have been added to the group of 25 years and more serving. That's a great record of service in the Fraser Valley.
You know what we say here at the Fraser Valley, we say, it's about guiding, advising, and protecting clients, filling the gap, And ultimately, I think one of the things that we've seen is realtors, you really can build trust with them, right? And I think that is currency for our realtor members, is that trust.
Sure, and that core of experienced professional will be great mentorship for the younger members and the newer members that are joining your ranks.
Yeah, I think so, and we've seen studies, I think, come out where, the trust and reputation matter a lot to the home buying and selling public. We've also taken calls at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board directly from consumers, who are sort of looking at this market and wondering, where do I start, right? And where do we go? And this is why we keep emphasizing on your behalf, members, we keep emphasizing that, you need to turn to a trusted realtor to guide you through this process. I'm one of those guys that, if I can get an expert to do something, I would rather, there we go, we see the results are there, and this is interesting. So we have 18.2% saying yes, but 81.8% saying no.
Okay, so it looks like of the members polled here, the vast majority want to keep proxy even where there is an advance voting option. That's what that says to me.
That's what it says. I know it's hard to speculate.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have we got the question? Have we read the question the wrong way? Okay. Can you bring is it possible to bring the question up again? Or Shaf, do you have it?
Yeah, if advance voting were permitted, do you think
Oh, yes. My mistake, and both of our mistakes. Sorry. We kind of read this question as kind of a do you support, but the question was framed the other way. So the 81% saying no, we're saying no, we don't think we need proxy anymore if advance voting is allowed.
Got it.
Right.
Well,
thank you to our crack team here who pointed that out for us.
We just want to make sure we're not sleeping, eh?
Right. So those numbers then kind of really align with the other one. We had better than 80% in favor of allowing advance voting, and better than 80% in favor saying if we had advance voting, we don't need proxies anymore.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Those align a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, members. Okay, let's go to the third proposed bylaw amendment. And again, please continue to keep us on our toes and submit your questions as well. So, Michael, this one is as follows. Modify the existing franchise rule to focus on limiting the number from a particular office and brokerage rather than the number from an entire franchise. Why is this important? Why do you think this is coming forward?
Right. Well, this one really needs some context, and not all members may be familiar with what is called the franchise rule within the board of directors. The franchise rule is something that has been in place since, I believe, the mid 1980s, And it was created at that time in response to some concerns that the board of directors could be taken over, speaking a little bit outlandishly, taken over by realtors all acting from one franchise. That they would somehow all get elected and the board would then be controlled by one corporate interest. This rule was put in place to prevent that from happening. The current rule says that no more than 3 directors from any one franchise, and by franchise I mean, you know, your Remax, your Sutton, your Century 21, from any office of any brokerage of one of those, you know, major collective real estate companies, no more than 3 on the board at any time. There were a couple exceptions written into the rule. The Brokers Council chair was outside of that rule. And also if someone moved from one franchise to another, they weren't immediately kicked off the board but could finish out their term. Now, the perceived concerns about that rule over the course of time are that it limits the number of good people you can have. I can't speak to whether those original concerns were valid or not. I simply wasn't around then to see it. But I have heard feedback from several members now and members of the bylaw advisory panel who said, you know, maybe that was a concern in the 80s when there was far fewer members, far fewer brokerages, but it's no longer the case today. There are no giant corporate interests that are combining together to try to take over the board. So at an earlier stage in the proceedings, we asked, well, one, would you consider getting rid of the rule entirely, just getting rid of it? That didn't receive very wide support. It seems that members still want some kind of guarantee that not everybody on the board can come from the same place. So our thinking has shifted and kind of moved into this other model of modification of that rule. So the modified rule would be, rather than a rule of 3 from a rule against more than 3 from a franchise, the modified rule would say no more than 2 from any particular office, you know, whether that office is physical or virtual, but, you know, realtors who are working together under the same team, and no more than 4 from any one brokerage, meaning whether it's more than one office or only a single office under a single managing broker. So that rule is being proposed as a modification to balance the interests of allowing more people to come in and not having to rule out anyone, and also keeping in mind that they want to protect against a wholesale ability of one organization to run the entire board. Lengthy answer, sorry, but there's a lot of history behind this one.
I think this is important context. I hope the members appreciate it, because this is not something you want to take lightly. I must say, though, I'm starting to see a pattern. You know, the work that you and the Governance Committee and Bylaw Rewrite Committee have done. There's a logic to all of these bylaw amendments.
It is. You really have to know where you're coming from before you can make plans to move forward, right? You have to understand the context.
Now, on this one, what is the most significant downside, I guess, of this proposed bylaw amendment, if there is one?
Of the current
current
bylaw?
Sorry, yeah, the bylaw.
Right. So the current bylaw's perceived downside is that with a rule of no more than 3, that it limits, and some would say has limited, good people who are qualified and would bring value to the board of directors. They simply can't be elected because there's already the 3. The quota has been met. And so that's the downside. Strongly perceived by some that good people have had to not serve in a given year. Even though they had the votes to be elected, they couldn't be put on the board because there was already others, 3 from their particular franchise. That's the perceived downside we're trying to balance against. Yeah.
And I mean, of course, the logic is that we want to have good representation, diverse talent, right? So different voices, which just enhances what the board does.
That's right. And I think that is one of the reasons why the members didn't want to abolish the rule entirely. There's still this need to have a variety of voices. And in particular, I think there was some comments from smaller brokerages, you know, that are not necessarily household franchise names who want to make sure that it's not just the big guys who can get a seat at the table, but there is room for the smaller brokerage as well to have their voice at that level. And that's a valid point.
if I may, I used to work at the Retail Council of Canada and another member sort of engagement association, and representing the retailers. And it was similar. We had the large retailers and we had the small retailers, and everybody wanted to have a voice because, there were different needs that might apply to both. But you want to still hear the nuanced perspective when you say of a smaller brokerage versus a larger one, because they may have different viewpoints on how something affects them.
Absolutely, and diversity across all different demographics will make for a stronger organization and better decision making. So that's why we've pivoted, if you'll forgive me, from just getting rid of the rule to modifying it to something that is more flexible, but still maintains some ability to ensure that there's a broad range of voices, and that a particular corporate interest can't have too many collected votes on the board.
Exactly. We have one question in the hopper, so Anthony, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, and interestingly, we're going back to the advanced voting rule. This is from Paul Bellemare, and he's with Remarks 2000. And he's wondering what happens if the resolution about advanced voting is amended at the AGM.
Oh, okay. Well, the answer there is actually less to do with about that special resolution than the fact that special resolutions to amend bylaws can't be amended from the floor of the meeting at which they're proposed. So, whichever one of these your board of directors decides to put forward to the membership, those are voted on kind of a yes-no basis. Because of the advance notice requirements, special resolutions have to be sent in advance to the members, and they're voted on in the form of which the notice was sent. So that means that even if members, some of them or a majority of them, were to want to make a change at the AGM, the legislative framework doesn't allow it. So that would have to be, if it was voted down because some change was necessary, it would have to come back later to the members with modifications. It's simply not possible to modify from the floor when it's a special resolution to amend the bylaws.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. What does it mean before then? You explained how you can't modify it from the floor.
Yes.
But what's the advice to members beforehand? I mean, should they be, I have bias, but should they be participating in these kinds of exercises?
Right. Well, this is why I believe Fraser Valley Real Estate Board is holding a series of 4 meetings that is going to touch on these topics. So it's not the first time at the AGM that members hear about this. So, and it's why we're asking these questions, to seek feedback and give you opportunity to ask questions about the details now, so that if there is a concern, an issue, a proposed tweak that you think should come to the attention of the governance committee, you have an opportunity to get that to us now before all the material goes out for the AGM. Because once the notice of the AGM has gone out and the special resolutions are part of that package, that's what's being voted on. No change is possible.
Great, thank you, Michael. Okay, I'll make this the last question. And this is, again, it's come through our channels from members outside of today. In the last 2 years, the board has introduced new, rigorous governance training for directors, as well as moved the board of directors from thinking operationally to thinking strategically. How important are these changes in the context of this proposed bylaw amendment?
That's a great question. It's certainly important that boards understand their role and their responsibilities. Boards of directors of a sophisticated organization like the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board are a governing body, not an operational body. You have a capable CEO and a deep staff team to take care of the operations of the organization. You have processes that the board sets in place to supervise that, but the board of an organization like yours should not be reaching into the weeds of operations on a regular basis. They have delegated that authority, and they should supervise, not manage the operations. As it relates to this special resolution for a bylaw amendment, or sorry, I should say this proposed potential bylaw amendment, it is related because directors want to understand not only should they not be involved in operations, but collectively they're being trained in the training that they receive, that their interests outside, to their own brokerage, to their own firm, to their own franchise, to their own realtors, When they put their board of directors hat on and sit around that table, all of that becomes secondary. And as a collective group of board of directors, they are required by law to put the interests of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board first, and to make decisions that will advance the best interests of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board as a whole, not necessarily their particular corner of it, whether that's a brokerage, a franchise, an office, or a community. So we always, I commend Fraser Valley Real Estate Board for sending its directors to get this training so that that understanding of, regardless of who I sit on the board with, whether they are a competitor, whether they're on the same team that I work on, here we all put on our hats of what's in the best interests of FVREB.
Wow, that's great context. I mean, it totally makes sense when you put it in that perspective, and it's trying to be sort of more broad-based and representative of the entire industry in question.
Absolutely.
All right, so as a reminder, I'm going to reread the proposed bylaw amendment. I'm going to read you the voting question. By now you hopefully know the drill about refresh, but we'll go through it one more time. So here is the proposed bylaw amendment. Modify the existing franchise rule to focus on limiting the number from a particular office and brokerage rather than the number from an entire franchise. And the voting question for you today is, based on what you've heard here today, would you support modifying the rule to focus on the limits from a particular office and brokerage rather than from an entire franchise? Reminder, of course, be on the vote screen. Hit home within that to refresh, not your browser, and make sure that once you vote, you hit continue and confirm so that your vote is registered. Let's start the countdown clock. And Michael, while that's happening, let's go back. I think I left off, I was trying to tell you that I'm one of the kinds of people who, I love the expertise and advice of those people who work with me or that I would engage with. And it was 2013, my wife and I were buying a home in the Fraser Valley here in South Surrey. And, it came up about an easement. I had no idea what an easement is,
Sure.
and kind of thing. So, I mean, the word even, it's like, oh my goodness, and I was so glad that, I had a realtor, my wife and I had a realtor who understood and explained what that means and gave us the pros and the cons and all this sort of things, it's maybe a small example, but I think it's indicative of the fact that that's why you engage expertise.
Absolutely. And, I can't claim to be unbiased in this because I'm an advisor in my own capacity. And so I'm an advocate for where you're entering into something that is beyond your experience. You should be seeking advice before you do. And, lawyers in particular, sometimes we have this saying that we say, it is always cheaper to prevent a problem than it is to fix a problem. So that, sometimes you're inclined, oh man, that might pinch in my pocketbook to get that advice now. I guarantee if it avoids the problem, that would be cheaper than having the problem arise and then having to pay someone to help you fix it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's such an important thing. And I think, I've heard stories of our members guiding their home buying, selling public in this market, for example, to consider doing home inspections, ahead of time, so that, because you're going to otherwise get into a competitive situation and you're better armed. I mean, I think we see this, and the results are out. Now, let's make sure I read this correctly. It's 90% in favor of the proposed bylaw amendment.
Right. So we've got 90%, our highest vote total yet, saying, yes, I support the modified rule as described. That's tremendous. That's great feedback, and I think it reflects the process that we've taken to get here, where we started with just getting rid of the rule. That didn't resonate with people as strongly, but this modified rule from this group is getting a tremendous show of support. Thank you.
Excellent. And now moving on to proposed bylaw amendment D, which should be on your screen now. And it's as follows. Amending the bylaws to provide that the officers of FVREB, Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, be elected by the Board of Directors versus the current model where members elect certain officers. Michael, why is this important? What's going on with this one?
Okay, so this is a big one, and I'm going to frame it that way right from the beginning. These other ones that are talking about changing the way you vote or changing how your Board of Directors is composed are significant, and that's why we're bringing it to you. But this is also a major change in the way the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board's governance would take place. Right now, as I'm sure you know, your Board of Directors your membership at the AGM votes for the election of a vice president and of a president-elect. That president-elect, who is then elected, goes on to be the president in the following year and the past president in the year after that, automatically. Now, that model under which members directly elect the officers is traditional, in particularly in professional organizations and associations like FVREB. But it is potentially with some drawbacks, and as a trend in governance for the past 10 or 15 years or more, is slowly falling out of favor. It's not considered best practice anymore. The reason there is that I think it comes to a misunderstanding of what the officers really are. The officers that you elect are not executives with decision-making power in operations. They are specific governance roles within the board of directors. So electing a president, you might think that that's very presidential. We could list examples, but we won't go there right now. But in fact, the president's role is to be the leader of the board of directors, not the chief executive of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. So here what we see is that knowing who the best person to put in that specific governance role as a function of the board, arguably the board of directors is in a better situation to make that call because they have seen those people in action around the board table. They know who contributes to the conversations and where their expertise lie. They know who doesn't necessarily contribute very much and may just be filling a seat. They have seen that, whereas the members from the membership have not. And that's why it's proposed and considered a best practice that you allow the board of directors, who are themselves elected by the members, to look amongst themselves and determine who the correct officers in a given year should be. And that would allow you to, that board to gauge the circumstances of the organization and put the right person in the right position. It's a little bit like how we have our Canadian political system set up. We, as Canadian citizens, get to vote not on who sits in cabinet, but who is a member of parliament. And here, parliament is kind of the broader board of directors, as you will. We, the voters, put people in parliament. Then, the party in parliament with the most collected seats, they get to determine who holds the cabinet roles, who's the Minister of Defense, who's the Minister of Finance, and so on and so forth. The election of officers is really fairly similar. They're portfolios with certain governance responsibilities within the board of directors. And so this amendment, while significant, would align with best practices to give that power to the board who sees those people in action and knows, arguably better, their ability to fulfill those portfolios.
Great context, Michael. Thank you for that. Let's start with a question that we've heard in the past. Since this proposed amendment was turned down by members in the past, can you explain the rationale for why this is being brought back for consideration?
Right, yeah, this has been brought forward in the past at least twice, 2014 and 2016 or 17, and was voted down. The answer I can give you is it was best practice then. It remains, and over the long period of time has consistently proved to be best practice now. And so, some members are annoyed by this. They say, the members have spoken. We don't ever want to hear this concept again. I don't take that that's the board's role there just to, take that and go away and never raise the issue again. The board's duty, again, is to the best interests of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And on the advice of professional advisors and governance teams, if they are convinced that the best interest would be a change such as this, they not only have the power, I'd argue they have the duty to bring it forward, even if it has been voted down before. It is ultimately the members' decision. No one's disputing that. They will decide this year again if this goes forward and whether it becomes part of your bylaws. But that doesn't take away the board's duty to bring forward the bylaw changes that they believe are in the best interest of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board again.
Thank you, Michael. Seems we have two questions in the hopper. So, Anthony, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, a question on the current amendment from David Rochelle from remarks.to, and he's wondering how would the directors be voted? for officers. How would that process take place? Would it be a secret ballot? What would the criteria for voting be? And would there be a minimum time to serve as director?
Okay, let's take those one at a time. So how would the voting occur? The typical practice is that it would occur after an AGM when your new board has been elected and in place. I'm sorry, and in your case, your directors take office April 1st, not right after the AGM. So it would happen after that. The new board of directors then, which would include some people who are serving their second year of term, some people who have just joined as per the recent election, they would look around the table and they would hold that election. Now, there can absolutely be qualifications for officer positions. There are currently in your bylaws. You have to have been a director for at least 2 of the previous 5 years to run for any officer position. Not proposing to change that requirement. All that this bylaw proposal would change is who's doing the voting. Now, I believe you asked a question in there about whether it would be by secret ballot or otherwise. Generally, yes. Secret ballot allows people to vote their conscience and not be swayed by the eyes that are on them as they vote. The only time I would say that it may not be necessary is if there's only a single candidate for a given position. Then, with nobody else running against them, you would generally have an acclamation to that position. However, that could be also addressed by saying, even if there's only one person, we want to know that there's majority support of the board, and so you hold a kind of a vote to make sure that that's there. That would be entirely appropriate. Anthony, did I hit all the points in that question?
Yes, it did. There was a question of the criteria to be able to be voted for. So the criteria of a candidate, I imagine.
Yeah, so the criteria of who is able to vote in an election by the directors is you've got to be a director. The criteria of who can be voted for, though, that should be in the bylaws as to who is eligible to run for an officer position. You have one requirement in there now. We're not proposing to change that, and it seems to have served the organization well.
We'll make the last question. So, Anthony, go ahead.
Sure, and actually, this is really more of a comment that had come in for the franchise rule, and it's from Dan Bennett of Home Life Benchmark, and he's heard this before about the need to find more people, and was wondering if it was possible to put together several scenarios whereby you could sort of see what the restrictions were on how the franchise rule couldn't, or how the franchise rule in its current state restricts the candidates, because the rationale and the visibility for it doesn't seem to be there.
If I'm understanding that correctly, he's kind of looking for a bit of a real-world example of how the rule would play out. The current rule would affect situation A, and how the new rule would affect it in a different way. I think it would be possible to create that rule. I'm not sure we want to use any, real names or past scenarios, but we could create kind of a hypothetical where, I think that would be possible. I'm not going to attempt to make one up here on the fly, though.
You can always send us a question to communications@FVREB.bc.ca, and we'll get you an answer. Before I reread the proposed amendment, Michael, this is one thing that this proposed bylaw amendment sort of behooves or urges, is that we want members to come forward and ask to be represented and have a voice, rather, at our table, right? This just sort of shows you want to attract more quality candidates to put their hand up and be a part of the board.
That's right, and you have to be a director first before you can be an officer. That's the way it is now, and that's, again, not proposed to change. We want the very best people to be coming forward, and that goes to the previous resolution or proposal about taking out or modifying that restriction. Once you have the best people at that table, you have to also kind of follow the logic and say, if these are the best people, then we have to trust them to make the best decision as to who should live in a certain role.
Right. Okay. All right. You know the drill by now, but I'll go through it anyway. I'm going to reread the proposed bylaw amendment, which is as follows. Amending the bylaws to provide that officers of FVREB be elected by the Board of Directors versus the current model where members elect certain officers. Now, the voting question for you today on this is, based on what you've heard here today, Would you support amendments to the bylaws to have officers elected by the board of directors? Please ensure you're now in the vote screen. Hit home, not in the browser, and continue and confirm to ensure your vote is counted. Let's get the clock going, and while that's happening, Michael, let me find another piece of
Yes, tell me something
information.
more awesome.
I tell you, well, I'm going to look here, and I think I'm going to talk to you about communications. You can tell there's a clear bias here,
I
right?
was gonna say.
Like I tell you. Anyway, but you know what? I think it's important that members know. Why? Because we want you to consider signing up for our social channels. We need you. Please, please, please. You know, our President Chris Shields has been pushing for this for a long time as well, and so are we. So please keep doing that. You know what happens here? In 2020, Fraser Valley's Real Estate Board's media exposure increased by 123% compared to 2019.
Wow.
Right? Our media reach increased by 247%. Right? In addition to that, you know, many of you will have seen videos we call Eye on the Market, which is, you know, President Chris Shields providing a summary of how our market has been performing. It's easily shareable, it's easily digestible, it's very snackable content. Have you heard this term these days? You're supposed to create content that's snackable.
Is that like, that's the new bite size?
That's new bite size.
Right, okay.
You know where it comes from as well? There's a study, I know people who've heard me say this are going to think, oh, God, there it goes again. But it's an MIT study that was published in the Globe and Mail about 2 years ago. The attention span of a human being is 8.5 seconds, 1 second lower than that of a goldfish.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, can you imagine?
That explains a lot.
Yeah, do you remember what I said? You know, I think this is, but it's crazy. You know, social media exposure at the board has increased by 332%.
Right.
We've appeared, we'll save that later. The poll question results are in, and we have 71.4% saying yes, and 28.6% saying no. Michael.
Okay, so here we have a strong majority in favor of this change as we've discussed it, and I want to thank you for that. I know that this is a significant one, and I'm glad we've been able to answer some questions and maybe address some of the concerns that were lingering out there, such that we have strong support for this change in how officers are elected.
Thank you. Reminder again, this is non-binding, but it's great to hear this feedback. It will be binding on March 11th. So why don't we go to the next proposed bylaw amendment? So now we're on E, and it says follows. One option the governance committee will consider is whether to combine the president-elect and president positions into a single president to serve for a 2-year term. Michael, what's the context behind this one?
Right, so E and F, this one and the next one, are really alternative options that both go to the same kinds of concepts. And I want to start with that, you know, like it's one or the other. It couldn't be both of these, or it's none at all. Now, right now, again, the system goes, you're elected as president-elect, 1 year. You automatically succeed to president, 1 year. You automatically become the past president, 1 year. So that's a 3-year train over 3 positions. You also have a vice president who in the normal course does become the president-elect, but that's not automatic. So you have kind of a long road to moving into the president position. Normally even before you're vice president, you'd have to be on the board first. So you'd have to be a director at some level first. And then in the normal course, vice president, president-elect, and then president. All of that so that the president can serve 1 year and then they're on to past president and somebody new has taken their place. Now, I'm not expressing a values judgment on this. This can work in various ways. What we want to get your feedback on is whether you think it would work better for Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. Because having that 1 year as president could be limiting and that you're not able to contribute as much or make as much of an impact just given the time restriction. You spend 2 or more years in preparation for that, and then 1 year and it's kind of the next one, and you're now in the past president looking in the rearview window. As a potential alternate, you could combine what's currently president-elect and president into one president position. So you'd still have the vice president. That would become even more the focus of preparation and grooming to take on the president or the chairperson's role. But you'd have a longer window in that period to be able to lead and to make a contribution before your time was up. That's the idea behind E, and we'll talk about an alternate in F in a moment.
Again, goes back to what we said earlier, the logical puzzle here. These pieces are all sort of
Yes.
falling into place.
And many of these things are somewhat interconnected, so it can be a little bit challenging to talk about them in isolation. But at the same time, we want feedback on the specific components so we can adjust them so that the best special resolutions come forward for your approval at the AGM.
Right. So, let's start with the first question here. You sort of talked a little bit about it. Maybe you can expand on it. What's the current issue with having two single-year positions again?
Yeah, it's not always a bad thing. I want to stress that this is not one where I can say that this is best practice and your current practice is not best practice. But the potential limitation is being a president for just 1 year after all that time goes in, you just can't make as much of a contribution. You have less time in that position to carry out the agenda that you're mandated to do. Moreover, there's been significant amounts of training that have been poured into you as a director and being groomed for one of these officer roles. Maybe that investment of resources would be better used if the term was longer. Maybe. Again, that's for your feedback. That's why we're asking.
That's very interesting, in this whole thing about ROI. I mean, really. Ensuring that it's a two-way street. Obviously, invest in the directors, and you want a greater return for the membership, right? Anthony says we have one question. So, Anthony, go ahead.
This one actually came in a little late, and it has to do with the election of officers. It's from Gurdip Sahota from Marola Page, Global Force Realty. And he's wondering if the information will be shared with members, that is on the election of officers by the board, so that they can take that into consideration when they're voting.
I'm not sure I see what the question is getting at. That would the board share the information with the members? They would certainly. I'm not sure this is what's being asked, but they would certainly, after an election of officers has happened, tell the members who's been elected, right? That's not going to be a secret position. So that's the case. If they're saying who will you elect so that we know whether to vote for you as a director or not, that's a bit of a trickier thing, because I'm not sure a person would know because they don't know who else has been eligible at that point.
And I can add one more comment, and he adds, while the board may be privy, surely the wider membership is entitled to know who is contributing and who's not just there for the ride.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So is that from the same individual?
Yes.
Okay. So the question really is, if there are concerns about a director's performance, why isn't that being shared with the membership? Perhaps that's what that question goes to. Well, there are situations in which that's appropriate, that it would be shared with the membership. And there are situations where I believe it's appropriate that the board would handle that internally. The fact that a director missed a meeting without having told them, that's not something that really is such a warning sign that you're going to put out that information to all members and kind of tattle on them. If there were a consistent pattern of serious misbehavior, though, that might be something that not only are you going to take action on, but you'd be telling your members why. Now, again, just putting my lawyer hat on briefly, there are all kinds of privacy and confidentiality issues that come with this kind of situation, and the board has to take those into consideration in what it can and can't share with the broad membership audience.
And there's one other question / comment, and I think it has to do with all the amendments. It's from Paul Bellemare, and again from Remax 2000. And he's wondering, is it going to be a simple majority vote, i.e. 51%, to pass these amendments?
To pass the amendments? No.
These amendments.
Right.
Yeah.
No. The threshold for a special resolution, which is required to amend any bylaw, is a special resolution requires a special majority. And the threshold and the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, as adopted last year, is 2/3. 2/3 of all the votes cast. So a simple majority, 51%, would not pass any one of these resolutions. You would need at least 2/3 in favor of any of them for that one to pass.
And thank you for that question. Maybe we'll make this the last one that I'll add to that, because my math is way off base. But 2/3, 66.6?
I like to call it 67 just to do the rounding up.
Yeah.
You know, if it's 66.66666, I'd rather round up than round down.
Got it, got it. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to reread the proposed bylaw amendment, and then we're going to get into voting. So one option the Governance Committee will consider is whether to combine the President-elect and President positions into a single President to serve for a 2-year term. The voting question for you is as follows. Based on what you've heard here today, would you be in favor of combining President-elect and President positions? Reminder, go to the vote section on your screen, click home there, continue and confirm. Let's start the clock. And while that's happening, I'll share one thing about myself with you, Michael, is like, talk about morning meetings. Oh man, I specifically took courses in university that were in the afternoon.
Oh yeah.
And I've had the challenging when I have the jobs. Of course, you have to show up, but I prefer doing that in the evening. It's easier.
That's true. I'd suggest that sometimes we consider member evening meetings too, because I'm also better at the end of the day than at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, I see. All right, well, let's look at this. We left off. We were talking, so FVREB, just finishing the communications piece, and then we have some other wow stats. But FVREB appeared in 1.2 million articles.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a huge number.
That's a huge number. I hope I got that right, 1,200. I think it's 1,200 articles. That's what it was. And the equivalency, though, this is the more important thing. The media coverage advertising equivalency was 5.5 million. So we got the equivalent of 5.5 million
readers,
kind of exposure, but we spent nothing near that, if you will. Right?
That's great. Very strategic.
Yeah. And this was interesting. We received media coverage in 9 countries. I don't have the countries in front of me, but that's a fairly interesting stat. It's again goes to show. I don't know if you heard this recently, but this whole idea of once we're into a new normal. There's projections now from many think tanks that, again, immigration is going to significantly increase. Before the pandemic, I think in the Hong Kong situation, there was a lot of Canadians that were looking either to come back or people were starting to consider. But I think, it'll heat up again.
Yeah, probably right.
Oh, we have the answers there. So we have 76.5% saying yes and 23.5% saying no. Any comment?
Yeah, very interesting. Maybe even higher than I would have expected. But we have a very strong supermajority that would be in favor of a combined 2-year position. I'll be very interested to see what the numbers are for our next one then, which is an alternative to that single automatic 2-year position.
And let's segue right into that. So, F, as an alternate to E, the Governance Committee will consider a potential amendment that would allow a president to be elected to serve consecutively for 2 terms, 1 year each. Michael?
So again, this is an alternative to what we just voted on. It couldn't be both together. What this changes would be that it wouldn't be automatic for the president or chairperson to serve for 2 years, but that it would be possible for them to be elected, in the first instance to a 1-year term, and then to a second 1-year term. The real difference here is that it allows the ability for the board to change to any circumstances that have arisen over the course of that first year. Having a person automatically for 2 years, they may well be the right person for the job, but potentially, maybe there's a change in circumstances. Maybe rather than a solid communicator, you need somebody with a strong financial basis as your chairperson in the second year. This would allow the decision makers to make that change while still allowing them to keep the same president if they were, in fact, the best person, he or she, for the job. So a little more flexibility in this proposal as opposed to automatic 2 years, start to finish. This one is 1 year you get, and the second year you can get if you're still the best person for the job.
And I think as we have it in the amendment as well, like you said, this would not be automatic and would only occur, A, where the president is willing to stand for election again, and B, where they're elected to that position again.
Sure. That's another point, actually, that deserves to be made, is that some people may be a little bit nervous about taking on a 2-year term. It's a big commitment to be president. You ask your current president, any of your past president, it takes a lot of time and effort. And they serve this organization at the expense of their ability to conduct business and let alone their other commitments in their lives. It takes a ton of time. Some people may be nervous about signing up if it was automatically going to be 2 years. Some of them might say, I just don't know if that's going to work for me. I better not go in the first place. This option would get people to say, well, it's not guaranteed, and it'll be up to the voters who gets that second-year term. And it's all based on the fact that if I'm not willing to serve that second year, it hasn't been as fun as I thought, it's been more work than I can handle perhaps, I can then gracefully exit still, having made a contribution over the course of a year, and then the successor can be elected in. So it's not just for the benefit of the organization, it might be for the benefit of the individual to be able to make a change between year 1 and year 2.
Thank you, Michael. And on that note, what are the pros and cons of this option over E, the proposed bylaw amendment E?
Flexibility. Option E is, if that were the way, it's 2 years. You know that going in and you do it. This option says definitely 1, could be 2 if you're willing and if the voters believe that you're the right person for the job. So flexibility. Now, is there a drawback to this one? The drawback is, I guess, some level of uncertainty that comes with that flexibility. If the person really believes they want a 2-year position, they don't get it automatically, and they may not be comfortable with that uncertainty. So the flexibility kind of cuts both ways. You don't know the whole 2-year result because you're doing this on a 1-year basis. Really what this does is allow a person who's willing and who's still the right person for a position to serve in it for 2 years, as opposed to simply making them for 2 years right from the get-go.
I know we have to watch our time, but let's make this the last question then. I think you've talked about this, but maybe expound on it. And I think it goes to that ROI. So, having a president serve for 2 years, if he or she is available, can do this. I mean, I think what I'm asking is there's probably a quid pro quo here. There's the benefit of the ROI to the board.
Yeah. But
I think 2 years also enriches the individual who has, like you say, given up a significant portion of their life.
Yeah, that's true. It can certainly benefit the individual to kind of see projects through from beginning to end, right? Right now, if the chair or president wants to, get something done, they only have 1 year to do it, where they could perhaps do something over a 2-year span that might be more meaningful or more rewarding. I won't say whether every chair would say I'd absolutely sign up for a second year. Some would say 1 is enough, and for those who think that way, that in many cases 1 is enough, this latest option it will be preferable to you than the one previous, which was automatically for 2 years.
I think it's safe in saying that, certain people who shall not be named recently had 4 years to make a difference and were still unable to do so.
Right,
so,
right.
That's so interesting to see. All right, Anthony, do you have questions?
Yeah, there's one question from John Barberson from Sutton Premier, and he's wondering if this bylaw change were to be exercised, what happens with the president-elect and or VP?
So the VP position would be unaffected by this. The president-elect position, it has to be, it's a good question that John's asked, and the details there are something that the Governance Committee has to consider. Whether it involves, again, combining those positions into one chair-president position, or whether somehow there'd be a way, if you had all 3 positions, and it would affect everybody's momentum to make a decision partway to have the president serve again or not. So probably the answer, John, is that it was resolved like the previous resolution in the president and president-elect positions being combined.
I've got one more.
One more, and it's kind of related. It's from Paul Bellemare again, Remarks 2000. He's wondering if the president decides to run for the second term, is there then an open election for the president?
Yes. Yes. That would certainly be my recommendation to the governance committee, is that it's not just at the call of the current president to say, I want a second term and you get it. It's very much, one, they need to be willing, but two, they need to be elected. So the electors could weigh other options in addition to the current president and ultimately make the decision.
All right, let's bring this last one to a close, and you can stop hearing my annoying rules on how you need to vote. But here is the proposed bylaw amendment. As an alternate to E, the governance committee will consider a potential amendment that would allow a president to be elected to serve consecutively for 2 terms, 1 year each. And the added context there, this would not be automatic and would only occur where the president is willing to stand for election again, and B, where they are elected to that position again. And the voting question for you for today is the following. Based on what you heard here today, which of the following options for the term of president do you prefer? And I think you're going to see 3 different options pop up on your screen. Remember, be in the vote. Click home within that to refresh, not the browser, and continue and confirm after you've placed your vote. And let's start the clock on that one, and let's provide you some more interesting data points, eh?
Okay.
Yeah? Professional standards, key part of our organization and a key part of members' needs and members' requirements. 955 logged tickets in the professional standards department in 2020 by way of phone, email, etc.
Wow.
Isn't that
That's a busy department.
Busy department, right? I think so. In addition, 620 phone calls, 335 emails, 291 complaints that they had to work through, 163 advertising issues, and 501 other sort of general questions, advice, and guidance that members. So, kudos. I think, thank you to those members who've been accessing professional standards. But in a market like this, again, things like that become so much more important, the way you hold yourself, comport yourself in the transaction, and uphold the values of being a trusted, guided advisor.
Having a strong professional conduct process and rules are so necessary to have public trust.
Right? It's just, so keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop, because I think our home buying and selling publics really need your guidance, your advice, your protection. It's a great time, I think, to be in the business and to be serving a clientele. I'll give you one last stat here that I have found, was that 500 individuals, teams, and commercial members qualified for our medallion this year. That's
500.
Yeah,
Wow.
So that's
amazing.
That's pretty cool. Let's see over here. There's also e-memos. So we issued 82, I think between 82 and 89 e-memos just on COVID and other related issues last year.
Wow. And what are these memos are for your members?
Yeah, so we use e-memos. I'll just finish off. We use e-memos to communicate with members, and we use another service called Newsreel. So we're always using these ways to highlight the important topics to them. So let's see what this is. There we go, the poll question. So the current model, 4.5%. The next one, maybe you want to analyze this one.
So we asked you here of 3 options. The first question that have you 3 options. And basically the options for you to vote on were, I like the current model. Single year, you move through, that's it. The second option was the latest one we just discussed about the option for a second 1-year term. And then the third voting choice was an automatic 2-year term. And so we've got 4.5% liking the current model, very, very small number, less than 5% saying that's the best model. The great majority, 63.6%, like the flexible option, the one we finished discussing just a moment ago, where you get 1 year and you could get a second year if everybody that wants that to happen. And still not as strong support, but not insignificant. Some prefer the automatic 2-year term, but it's about double that. The flexible option is the clear winner.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our proposed bylaw amendment discussion. Thank you, members, for participating. Michael, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shaf.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, members, for being engaged in this process and giving us this valuable feedback.
Excellent. We're now going to move to Ask Me Anything, #AMA. Always want to sound cool here at the board. And we're going to have a little bit of time where you can ask our president, Chris Shields, and our CEO, Baldev, any question you want. So I'm going to ask them to take seats, and then we'll get going. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate you being with us throughout this morning. And I know we have a little bit of time for questions. Anthony, do we have any questions that have come in, or should I get going with some other questions that we had already come through? Yeah? Okay. So, welcome, gentlemen. How are you both doing?
Great, thank you, Shafik.
Excellent.
Good morning, Shaf.
Good morning. Here's one question that's come through before. This one is for Chris. In December, you took the unusual step of preparing a myth versus fact sheet. Why was it necessary for the board to do this?
Well, thanks for the question, Shaf. We had a number of members posting on closed social media groups some what we would consider mistruths or maybe fake news, if you like. And we felt it was important to get the truth and the actual facts out to the membership. So your comms department created this myth and fact sheet, which I've had some great feedback on already. And it's been posted on our closed social media group, Facebook group, for just members of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. So if you haven't found and joined that group yet, I encourage you all to do so. And if you haven't seen the myth and fact sheet, the good news is that either later today or tomorrow, it will be published in this week's newsreel. So stay tuned for that. I've already heard a lot of great things about it.
Thank you, Chris. Baldev, this one's for you. The board did a lot to support members through the pandemic. Can you summarize the key initiatives and some of the challenges in light of the COVID-19 lockdown and the impact on our organization?
Thank you very much for the question, Shafik. Well, when the pandemic hit in early 2020, we had to pivot as an organization very quickly to ensure that we were able to continue to provide the services to all of our members. So we had to transition from working at the board offices to working remotely. And that required a lot of logistical support for each and every one of our employees here at the board. But I was pleased to see that we were able to make that transition seamless, and we were able to provide all of the services that we normally do at the board office remotely. And then 2 months later, we had to transition back because the halt, if you will, was lifted. And so we transitioned back to the board office. It's also interesting to note that during that period of time when most of our staff were working from home, we made some enhancements to our building to ensure that we were following the protocols as defined by the province. And so when the staff came back 2 months later in mid-May, everything was ready to go. And that just provided further confidence to our staff that they could return back to our offices and be protected. Interesting enough, in June, a few weeks later, when we came back to the office, we had a surprise visit from WorkSafe, and they wanted to see the protocols that we had put in place. And I'm pleased to report to the membership that based on the audit that was done by WorkSafe officials, we passed with flying colors, again, adding to the confidence of our staff. And so that was very, very important because we wanted to make sure that the services that we were providing to our members were of top notch, and we didn't have any disruption with respect to those services. And you've all heard about some of our communications around going to virtual open houses as opposed to in-person open houses. And we supported our members by putting out the relevant communications around that, how they could protect themselves as well as their clients. And also we encouraged our realtors to use technology to really leverage the experience by their customers as well as their clients.
If I could just add to that, Baldev, the whole process was quite seamless. For myself as a member, you couldn't even tell whether staff were working from the office or had transitioned to working from home. Courses continued to operate. I found out after the fact that our receptionist had pretty much a switchboard on her dining room table, and the phone calls were still coming into the board and being patched out to various staff members at their homes. So it was a very seamless process, and we're quite proud of the job that your staff did. And also, I think it's also something to note is that on May 19th, when you began that gradual transition of staff returning to the office to work, We were the first board in the province to do that. Is that not correct, Baldev?
Absolutely, and we took that time, as I mentioned earlier, we took that time to make sure that while our staff were working from home, that we made the necessary improvements to be able to return quickly back to the office, and so that we could be up and running when we were given the go, and that's exactly what we did. We were the first board within BC to do that, so very proud of that.
Excellent.
Wow, that's a great stat, right? It's so awesome to see what we've been able to do. I know we have one question that's come in, so Anthony, why don't you tell us what that one is?
Yeah, this actually harkens back to the amendment number D, election of officers by the board of directors as opposed to members. And it's actually two members here, Dan Bennett of Home Life Benchmark and John Barberson of Sutton Premier. And they're both along the same lines. Basically, I think there's a sense that this is a good idea, that directors could elect officers. However, the idea about timing, with as many as 4 directors serving for the first time, how would you be able to gauge who would make the best officers?
Okay. Before I pass it over to our panel here, wondering if Michael wants to have any comment on this particular question. Michael, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, you could come up to this podium if you don't mind, Michael. While Michael's joining us, I'm just going to add that in your comments, Michael, you mentioned that shortly after the term began, April 1st, that the current directors, including the new ones that have just arrived, would vote on who are going to be the executive officers. I wonder if you wouldn't consider maybe having that election process at the end of the term, like just prior, say, to the AGM, so that that group has had a chance to really identify who would make the best leader and is most engaged at the table. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good.
Sorry, I don't mean to throw an extra question in here.
No, that's fine, and I appreciate the context. I've heard that conversation before and had that issue discussed about, well, really, if this is about the people knowing best making the decision, isn't that the outgoing board, not necessarily the brand new incoming board? Fair point. What that means, and I have seen it implemented, it is possible to do it that way. What it means is that those people who are coming in have no participation in that discussion. So you're balancing that idea of the people who know best because they've seen them in action and been involved with them at the board table. You're balancing that against kind of a democratic question of, well, that if we do it that way, it means certain members who just came in will have no say at all. Now, not in that given year. The next year, they'll be part of the decision. That's the only caveat I've heard people say to counter that. Why don't we do it before the term ends as opposed to when the new one starts?
Thank you, Michael. I hope that answers the question that was asked. I have another one here that's come in the past. Chris, you referenced that you want us. We are seeking to leverage the experience and expertise of the membership, right? What's your ask of members in 2021?
My ask of members in 2021 is get involved on social media. We really have a lot to offer in the Fraser Valley. There's local attractions like the White Rock Pier and the White Rock Festival of Lights that they did this past winter, which was a fantastic attraction down on the waterfront. So the more we can get involved in social media and let our followers know what we have to offer in the Fraser Valley, I think that will help all of us. And I guess on top of that, it would be just, this is a time more than ever where our role as educators, educate our clients through the process, is so important. We need to guide them through, especially this challenging market that we're having right now. So I think taking the time to explain and manage their expectations is paramount. And also reinforcing Dr. Bonnie Henry's COVID-19 safety protocols, that we keep doing what we can to ensure the safety of, like you say, Shap, not only ourselves, but each other and the public.
Excellent. We've got time for, another question's come in. Anthony, please go ahead.
This is quite an operational question, again from Dan Bennett of Home Life. Not a new issue, he says, but you're certainly aware that one of the most common questions we heard from primarily REBGV members on TouchBase is, can you give me a one-day code? I'm having trouble with the Sentry Lock card. More often than not, it's fairly clear that the individual has no Sentry Lock card. This needs to be resolved with REBGV. We keep emphasizing professionalism, yet we, our own professional associations, allow this to continue. And just wondering if you had a comment on that issue.
Well, I certainly feel the frustration of the member that's posed the question. It's something that comes up time and time again. And occasionally our executive officers from the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board will have, well, in the past we've had dinner meetings, not so much this year, with the Vancouver board. And this is a topic that does come up quite frequently. And we keep trying to encourage REGBV to get on board with lockbox cards. We made a decision at our board several years ago to make it mandatory that if you're a member of this board, you automatically get a lockbox key, and there's no need for us to be asking for one-day codes. So we keep pushing for that. I feel your pain, and I guess, you know, we each have to conduct our business in a way that makes sense. Personally, I choose not to give out one-day codes. So I think that's a business model for each of us to make a decision around. But rest assured, our board is picking away at the issue with our neighboring board consistently.
Thank you. I want to be mindful and respectful of our time, so we'll take one more question.
Actually, this is it's not so much a question, and I know we're also cognizant of the time, but maybe a good one to end on. It's from Gurdip Sahota, Royal LePage, Global Force Realty. He just says, I want to congratulate Baldev and Chris on the way that they have steered the FVREB during this highly disruptive pandemic.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much for that feedback.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you for the support. It really means a lot.
Excellent. So we're going to close this portion, and before we end, I'm going to ask Baldev to give us some closing remarks and then see us on our way. Baldev, over to you.
Thank you, Shaf. And thank you all for sharing part of your morning with us. I hope the past hour and a half has helped you gain a little more insight and understanding into the initiatives we are looking to bring forward at the upcoming AGM in March. These morning meetings cover a number of different areas, but at the core for me, they're all about communication. They're invaluable because they provide a rare opportunity for two-way dialogue in these socially distanced times. They are definitely no substitute for face-to-face meetings, but technology has given us the next best thing. Your feedback is vital to the board's growth and progress, and I truly appreciate the questions and opinions you've all shared with us here today. For example, simply understanding the relative importance to membership of each of the bylaws we reviewed today will help us immensely in our preparations for the AGM. Importantly, it will ensure that our efforts and resources are directed in a focused and productive manner. Because at the end of the day, we're here to serve you and your needs. Whether we're supporting professionalism through enhanced educational offerings, or refining the data and stats that you rely on to serve your clients and grow your business, or strengthening the board's leverage and competitiveness by broadening our reach. Everything we focus starts with one simple question. Is it good for the membership? The answer is mission critical and shapes our path moving forward. A simple example, the decision to reopen the offices as soon as possible after Dr. Bonnie Henry's directive on the all clear was made to members. We recognize that the best way to support you as you navigated the new landscape was by having all hands on deck. It turns out, given the way 2020 has gone, it was a sound and pragmatic decision. We faced an unprecedented real estate market in unprecedented times, a time rife with opportunities, but not without pitfalls and drawbacks, as we all adjusted to the new reality. I want to applaud you all for being true professionals in the face of these challenges, for being a shining example of best practices in how to conduct business and maintain livelihoods, yet not lose sight of the greater need to keep our loved ones and fellow citizens safe. I want to applaud our team here at the board as well. Just like you, they had to pivot and adjust. And I'm proud to say that we did so with virtually no disruption to member services. Judging by the notes of gratitude and appreciation we've received, I know that many of you also recognize their tremendous efforts. And by the way, I'm not just saying this. Earlier today, I received a summary report of various departmental metrics and was really blown away by the sheer volume of what we achieved. For example, Our IT help desk created over 10,000 work tickets and fielded just as many calls last year. That's an increase of 20% over the previous year. We also added 12 new course offerings in our education department. And we also pushed out over 260 articles on Newsreel, resulting in over 75,000 page views. These are just a few of the many highlights from this incredibly talented and resourceful team, and it reflects our full commitment to supporting our membership. Despite the obstacles and challenges over the past year, we've made good headway on our strategic plan. And by the way, sneak preview, our financials are strong as we prepare for the new fiscal year. I'll be updating the membership in greater detail with respect to our audited financial statements. We are in the process of being audited right now. I hope you will all be able to join us at the AGM. Thank you once again for being with us today and for your candor and thoughtfulness. I encourage you to continue to reach out to the team here, to your board, or across any one of our social media channels to continue the dialogue. I look forward to picking up with you again at the next Triple M meeting scheduled for February 11th and February 25th, or at the AGM on March 11th. Until then, thank you for your continuing support to the board. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Baldev. Well said. And thank you all members for joining us here today. Reminder again, as Baldev said, February 11th and February 25th, 9:30 to 11 each one of those mornings. Please participate. Please get others to participate. If there is a year where we want to hear from you for sure, it's this year. Remember what Chris said, we're 100 years young, and let's get started for another 100 years ahead. Thank you for joining us. Be well, be kind, be safe. Have a great day.